What is ontological dysphoria? Well, on an analogy with gender dysphoria, which is the feeling that you've been born and that you're living in the wrong body, the wrong gendered body. So, for example, if I felt that I was actually a woman trapped in a man's body, I would be feeling gender dysphoria. That even though everything else in my life might be going well, I might still feel that I need gender reassignment surgery to put me right, to make me whole. And this could be, um, I might be past the age where I'm not having any wish to pursue a relationship or anything of that sort. It may have no impact on what I can earn or on my life chances, so to speak, because I'm too old for that to matter. And so the question arises, and this is a question which some people have debated. They've debated whether gender dysphoria is something real, whether, for example, a person should be permitted to have gender reassignment surgery. Um, and one argument that was put forward, and this was in the context of the film starring Hilary Swank, Boys Don't Cry. One argument which was put forward was that perhaps the person that she was portraying in that movie, perhaps that person was actually a lesbian. She had been brutalized, she had been, sexually abused. And so the only reason that she was experiencing gender dysphoria was because society had conditioned her to deny her lesbianism. That, in other words, the homophobia in society and the patriarchal sort of attitudes prevalent at that time in that milieu in America was so powerful that this young person was not really capable of wishing gender reassignment surgery. That her real problem was that she had not understood that she had not understood that it was society's attitude and repressive and hostile and homophobic attitude which was conditioning her preferences. Now, against this view, and I think many people have come down to many scientists and other people have come to feel that yes, there is actually something which corresponds to gender dysphoria, that some people just feel that they are in the wrong body. In fact, countries like Iran, strangely enough, has given a lead that the Ayatollahs there, when they were convinced that gender reassignment was nothing to do with sexual indulgence, but this was a genuine case of, for example, a man being trapped in a woman's body or a woman being trapped in a man's body. And I believe the case which convinced the Ayatollah, the Islamic judges in Iran in the 80s, was that of a man who went and said, look, believe me, I have no desire to for any sort of illicit pleasure, or I'm not doing this for thrills or to make money, but this is the nature that I am in the wrong body. And if you go and you ask my parents and you ask my, that this has nothing to do with what is described in the Quran Sharif, which is described in the Hadith, as the practice of dressing up as a woman, or this is not the thing which has been condemned by the Prophet. So, in other words, so you see, we recognize, I think increasingly we recognize that gender dysphoria exists. And that, for example, the old-fashioned feminist theory, which was that you say no woman could possibly want to have gender reassignment, because it is only society's very hostile image of of the female, which induces people to want this. So we must tackle society's problem. Now, this raises some other issues. I think in South Park, there's a man who wants to be a dolphin. So should he be allowed to have reconstructive surgery to become a dolphin? His son wants to be a basketball player. Should he be allowed to have implants in his legs so that he can become, in fact, to become African American? I think that was the. It's not a subtle program, South Park. So, obviously we have a question as to whether ontological dysphoria, whether parallel to gender dysphoria, there are other sorts of dysphoria. There could be Michael Jackson type dysphoria, where you don't want to be black, you want to look like Elizabeth Taylor, or you don't want to, I don't know, there are so many different sorts of, plastic surgery gone horribly wrong. There are these sort of notions there. In the case of Michael Jackson, we might say, look, here's a young man who, he was my age, so perhaps there were very negative stereotypes of black people, and that it was not something that he really wanted, but it was a sort of an illness in society which had brainwashed him. I think now we would recognize that a person's self-image can be dramatically different, from what you see in the mirror. G.K. Chesterton famously spoke of the thin man trapped inside a fat man's body. And I think, certainly there are issues about, there are questions we must ask about body image, about, for example, the anorexic looks in the mirror and may see a really obese person. I, on the other hand, may look admiringly at the mirror and, pat my stomach lovingly, my pot belly, fondle my pot belly, and feel that this is the acme of male perfection. So, in other words, there are other issues here, but let us now talk about ontology. What does ontology mean? Well, ontology is the philosophy of being. What does it mean to exist? What exists? Is it stuff that we look at and that we can see? Is it real? Is it really real? Is there something more real behind it, or is it all an illusion? And these are some questions which ontology looks at. And let's take something which something with a contemporary flavor. Let's talk about the Matrix films. In the Matrix films, it's a sort of a philosophical thought experiment which asks, how do you know if we're not a brain in a vat? Hilary Putnam's brain in a vat, experiencing the world as a computer simulation. So that what really is a stream of digits, while the qualia that we are experiencing, the sensations of being able to touch and to be able to eat and to drink, these qualia, these very, very real sensations, they may be purely artifacts, they may be simply algorithms. And there are some others who would also say that, look, perhaps the whole universe is just a holographic projection. Perhaps it doesn't exist in these dimensions. So there are, so this is the sorts of questions which ontology asks. Now, ontological dysphoria is a very old idea that we are not at home on this planet or at home in this universe. That there is something that I think Dostoevsky, he's the sort of the poet of ontological dysphoria, or the perhaps poet or the chronicler, he's the Homer of ontological dysphoria. He explores the landscape, and he continuously says that, we are not flowers native to this garden. We are from somewhere else, and this is a theme which one can find certainly in a lot of literature, and we'll be looking at that during the course of this. But now the question arises that what is the point of elaborating a notion of ontological dysphoria and thinking about what that implies? Well, two or three answers present themselves immediately. One is that a lot of our thinking, a lot of our policy decisions are the sort of things that we subscribe to, decisions which really affect our lives. All these decisions are not actually made by us. We have handed the power to make those decisions to, for example, the actuary. The actuary calculates your life chances, your life expectancy, your risks of various things, and then makes a provision on your behalf. So your pension fund employs an actuary. Now, let's say you don't have any money. Then it is the government actuary is doing that. Or when there's any policy change which affects you, then essentially the government or somebody is doing a cost-benefit analysis. And in these types of cost-benefit analyses, they really do make a difference. For example, I have to have bulbs in my house, which don't actually give out very much light. And the reason I have to have these light bulbs, I can't buy the light bulbs that I want, is because the government of the European Union, or the European Union, has decided that they're bad for the planet. They've made some cost-benefit analysis, and they've said, well, it's better that you have a bulb which isn't very bright, and you have a vacuum cleaner which doesn't really do a good job of sucking out dirt. But this is good for the environment, and this is good for the posterity, and so on. Now, when we actually look at the social choice theory and the political philosophies which underpin the way that power is exercised, we find that there is a bias against ontological dysphoria. That we find there is what's called a presentism, a bias towards presentism, and in fact some thinkers, we will look at one called Roberto Unger from Harvard University, who essentially says that, look, it is your duty to be at home in this world. You ought not to be ontologically dysphoric. So this is a bit like the feminist who says, well, a woman who wants gender reassignment surgery oughtn't to, you see, because she should remain a woman and fight against the patriarchy rather than go over to the other side. And then, so, there is a question as to whether ontological dysphoria is not something quite wicked. It's a bit like South Park. In South Park, there's an episode where the children have to vote, and their choices between a douche and a turd. And this is, they have to vote for the school mascot. Is it going to be a douche? Is it going to be a turd? This is, the essence of American democracy. And one little boy doesn't want to. So, what difference does it make? Douche, turd, But of course he is expelled, he is ostracized, he is sent out into the wilderness. Because it's essentially ontologically dysphoric to say that the choice between a douche and a turd is no choice at all. So, if these are the two things on the menu, to say, screw this. It's a douche, it's a turd. What do you want? So there's this element of ontological dysphoria, and the notion that it is fundamentally evil, that you must choose from the menu, and if you don't, there's something wrong with you. You're evil. So we need to really challenge that view, and I would want to also show that all political philosophy or social choice theory, welfare economics, or indeed things like the fact value distinction, which some thinkers like Hilary Putnam, wants to erase, or even going back further to Quine. We might find that when we look at this in the context of the permissibility of ontological dysphoria, in connection with the, in other words, my notion is that most of us, perhaps evolution has designed us not to feel at home in the world. And so a lot of our actions in this world really are about worlds which are impossible worlds, which are not compossible worlds. So, goodbye to Leibniz, goodbye to sufficient reason, goodbye to the notion that rationality constrains you to choose between what is feasible. And of course, I think, when we look at evolution, we find that most evolution is neutral network. Right? There's a neutral theory of evolution, it's neutral network theory. And so when we actually go into it, and in fact, when we look at mathematics, what we're going to find is that the prejudice against ontological dysphoria is foolish, it's unfounded, and what's more, every presentist position is in fact ontologically dysphoric. Anyway, I've spoken enough, and let's move on.